The opinions shared by our host and guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect the views of the Organization of American States or its donors. Thank you for tuning in.
Las opiniones expresadas por nuestros presentadores e invitados son propias y no necesariamente reflejan las ideas de la Organización de los Estados Americanos ni de sus donantes. Gracias por acompañarnos.
Welcome to a new episode of La Zona de Zone podcast, a project supported by the Organization of American States Adjacency Zone Office, financed by the government of Spain. My name is Gwendolyn, and I'm joining you today here in La Zona de Zone studio for another episode. I'm here with a new colleague who will now introduce himself.
My name is Jackson Zhao. I'm from Benqueville del Carmen, and I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to talk about today. In today's episode, we'll be diving into how rapid urban growth is reshaping communities, stretching public services, and also creating new challenges and opportunities for local residents, youth, and decision makers alike. So for our first segment, we're going to be talking about the rising populations, rising pressures that also come with, when populations rise, and managing urban growth in small towns.
In this segment, we're zooming in on an issue that's affecting small towns in the adjacency zone and surrounding communities, and it is rising populations.
Whether it's due to people moving from rural areas in search of work or families fleeing from instability in search of safety, small towns like Benqueville in Belize and Mencos in Guatemala have seen steady population increases over the past decade. The result? Local governments are stretched thin, from healthcare to housing, transportation to water access, and they're not alone.
Take the city for Belmopan in Cayo. It just saw explosive population growth as people fleeing rural poverty sought out jobs. The city faced a severe shortage of affordable housing. And this could be a result of the importance of the capital city as the home of the majority of ministries and embassies in Belize, and of course, other companies that provide jobs for people.
Let's explore some emerging trends. Migration patterns from rural areas into towns like Benqueville and Mencos have accelerated in the past 5 years. This puts a strain on municipal budgets and public systems.
And while this influx adds vitality and new skills to these communities, it also puts a strain on infrastructure, especially when growth is unplanned, unsupported, and delayed. At the same time, there's an opportunity here. Studies show that when given the opportunity, the right to work and access to education and healthcare, refugees and asylum seekers contribute meaningfully to local economies, but that requires investment in urban systems that are already stretched thin.
So while things such as urban pressure is real, migration, when managed with a vision and when you have a purpose, I think it can bring a lot of cultural richness. As we know, Belize is a country with a bunch of different cultures. It could also renew and expand our labor force, which helps, and add strength to our economy. But towns need support. Clear urban planning, access to international aid, and participation within the community is very crucial.
Yes, that gives us a real look at the behind-the-scenes work needed to keep towns functional and livable as they grow. And, of course, considering the different cultures within these communities.
Next up, we're turning to one of the biggest concerns for families in these growing areas, housing. From affordability to access, what does it look like to build homes for people that meet the needs of expanding communities?
In this segment, we're taking a closer look at housing, one of the biggest challenges of growing towns. The region has a rich architectural history from traditional Maya construction techniques.
That's right. And as we talk about housing today, we also want to reflect on how construction styles have evolved in the region, from traditional Maya housing made with limestone walls and thatched palm roofs to Spanish colonial stone and adobe homes. The region has a rich architectural history that continues to influence how homes are built today.
We can see these different styles reflected across different communities. Like in Benque, for example, there is a stronger Spanish colonial influence in the way that we build homes. And in other surrounding villages, you can still see the thatched palm roofs that some families still live in.
Right. Since we're in a topic of, buildings and how, colonial styles have changed a lot of things. Tell me more about that.
Well, in Benque, we've noticed that the houses tend to have the doors really close to the road. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
There's like the road, the fence, and then the door directly after the fence. And so they tend to be closer to one side of the property. And then I don't know if you've noticed also, if you go to Melchor often, a lot of families in Guatemala tend to have iron doors or metal doors.
Right.
And that's like the first door compared to the screen doors that we have here in Belize. We have like a wooden screen door for the mosquitoes and then a hardwood door that is the actual door of the house, right? But in Guatemala, the first door is not the screen, it's a metal door. And then you might actually have a wood door or a screen door right after that. So I found those distinctions particularly interesting,
Right.
especially since it's directly within the adjacency zone. I'm not sure exactly why they've chosen metal doors. There could be another cultural issue or a safety issue that is contributing to the way that these houses are being built, which is also a huge factor when it comes to housing, safety, and accessibility to the homes.
Right.
So since we mentioned that safety is one of the contributing factors when it comes to determining how you manage urban growth and infrastructure in towns and cities, we also have to consider other rising pressures such as migration, population increase, job availability or non-availability, and also the market price for real estate in these areas, which can be changed or it can fluctuate depending on who is buying the land. And this could include expats, other migrators, people from different parts of the country, companies who are also buying land for business purposes. All of these things can make urban growth management a little bit difficult when it comes to making it affordable and livable for local people. And now we'll move on and talk about a little bit more of our roots right here in the adjacency zone. The Maya were resourceful builders using local materials like limestone, clay, and palm to create structures that were both functional and adapted to the climate, cool, breathable, and sustainable. Colonial styles brought symmetry, thick adobe walls, and courtyards designed for family life and shade. But the Maya were no strangers to family life, because they also constructed plazas, and in each plaza, there were several small thatch houses that were included. This style of thatch roof is not necessarily abandoned. It's still being used today. The use of these thatch roofs can last for years, up to 15 to 20 years. So it's nearly my entire lifetime before my family has ever had to change the thatch roof in our palapa.
It's always cool to see that, obviously things that were effective in the past are still effective today. And today, with limited budgets and especially rising material costs like inflation and everything, I think everything has just gotten more expensive in general. Many families are just turning to concrete blocks or even repurposed materials, sometimes without formal permits or planning, which makes it, dangerous and in a sense illegal. This gives rise to informal settlements that may lack proper ventilation, sewage systems, or structural safety. I think this puts many people's lives at risk.
You're right. But on the contrary, the government also has a number of requirements for building now. They require verified electrical wiring verified by a certified electrician, and also the Central Building Authority has to verify the building that is being constructed within the town. And to construct within the town, you have to apply for a town council permit to construct in that area. And along with that, you have to hire an architect if you're building a structure beyond 1,000 feet. So all of these procedures have costs that a lot of local people may not be in the position to pay. So while we're also worried about safety, we're also concerned about how accessible building a home is for families.
And these are a lot of great things to take into consideration when we plan on, building houses in the future. I think a lot of people, when they plan on building homes, they don't really take those things into perspective. So I think as more people move in, I think homes are getting harder and harder to afford. Since less and less houses are available, maybe they might become more expensive. And some families are turning to overcrowded or just informal living situations. And it's really raising a lot of real concerns about safety, planning, and, just access to the house in general. Like some people might have to get through, rivers and stuff just to get to their homes.
Yeah, well, those are some concerns when it comes to overcrowding and informal living situations. A lot of towns and villages, settlements started as informal living situations, and then they grew into the villages and the towns that we know today. Right. So we could see that as a transitionary measure that we have to live through in order to create our communities. But also, I've noticed that families that live in what we would call overcrowded homes tend to have a more sense of togetherness and unity within themselves and their families, which is an interesting pro and con, where we're in the more individualistic mindset of everyone having their own home, but we're also isolating ourselves from our extended families. So our children are not growing up with grandmothers or grandparents or their extended uncles and cousins, because we're not living in the same house. But where if we go to a family's house where they live on one plot of land, and then there's many of them, all the aunts and uncles are there, all their children play together, and they have this unity growing up. So it's interesting to see, what we're willing to compromise for the sake of public safety and housing.
And there's another huge layer to this story that's, especially relevant in the adjacency zone. This is where we are between Belize and Guatemala. And land tenure and legality. Many families live on plots here without formal titles, or in areas where residential construction is either restricted or not permitted under confidence building measures.
Exactly. Under agreements facilitated by the Organization of American States, like the Placentia Accord and earlier protocols, both governments committed to avoiding establishing new civilian settlements, farming, or infrastructure projects in the defined adjacency zone. That means building homes or expanding towns in certain areas can violate international agreements and escalate tensions, which is definitely something to consider when we're talking about urban growth and planning.
It's also about risk. Informal expansion into restricted environmentally vulnerable lands, especially along riverbanks or steep hillsides. I think in Benque we have a great example, and I think Melchor might have some houses along the river as well, right? These situations can really expose families to flooding or landslides. I think families along those areas are really vulnerable to it.
As communities in the adjacency zone continue to expand, the demand on roads, water systems, drainage, and public facilities grows too.
So with what you mentioned, I think it's clear that, planning isn't just about buildings and roads. It's also about making life better and more sustainable for everyone in these growing towns, especially since, more people are constantly coming in. Like, what can we do to, prepare for these things? And what can we do to make life easier for everyone?
That's right. Housing isn't just about walls and roofs. It's about habitability, accommodating and encouraging sustainable lifestyles and different cultures. And access to water is one of the most critical parts of that.
And when we do some research, globally, the numbers are staggering. According to the United Nations, over 2 billion people still lack access to safe drinking water. And for water to be, something that we need every single day, I think that's very difficult. And that's almost 1 in every 4 people. And even more don't have access to proper sanitation.
The UN reminds us, clean water is a right, not a privilege. El agua limpia es un derecho, no un privilegio. But in overcrowded settlements or informal neighborhoods, especially some of those similar to Benque Viejo and Melchor de Bencos, water is often scarce.
So with all the things that you've mentioned, I think that's why urban expansion must definitely go hand in hand with sustainable water planning. In the adjacency zone between Belize and Guatemala, water scarcity is not just an environmental concern. I think it's a human rights issue. We've talked about how obviously water is a basic need in our everyday lives, and when we find places to live at, I think we kind of prioritize the access. How easily are we going to be able to have access to water? And usually we lean towards places that have rivers, for example, right? And sometimes, the river can be used for a lot of things, and sometimes if you don't have access to water, I think the river is one of the things we go to. And sometimes a big issue in, locally, either regardless if it's Benque or Melchor, I think a big issue in our community is just keeping rivers clean. We often question, like, what can we do to keep these things clean?
Yes, you're absolutely right. The rivers are our main source of water, especially in communities that are rather small and are far away from the town's potable water systems, right? Yeah. So we often have pumps and carry water from the river to our homes, and then we have the task of purifying that water at home. Some households may have their water tanks where they collect rainwater. They may have a pump, a gas pump that they generate water towards their tank. And then so that water is not always completely clean. There could be floods, there's the changing climate, there's different storms that will throw in debris and dirt with the erosion that happens when it rains. The water will get dirty and you'll end up having like pretty murky water, right? So these families, this is the water that they use for cooking, cleaning, and even washing. And it could produce a number of small issues, such as your soup being a different color than it normally is, or when you wash your white clothes. And in my experience, I've found that I can't wash my white clothes where I live with my grandmother, because the water that we use comes directly from the river, and when it's the rainy season, it's kind of murky. And if I wash my white clothes, it turns into a brownish yellow stain. So I send my clothes to wash in the town in San Ignacio or in Benque, so that I can have crisp, clean white clothes for work. So I know many of the other people in Cala Creek also experience this issue.
And since we're on the topic of natural resources, there's currently a project that's ongoing, and it's called Deepening Access via Rural Electrification. What's shorter for it is DARE. We'd say DARE for this. And it's a $1 million US initiative funded by the IBSA fund to be implemented by UNDP. DARE will provide reliable energy services to underserved communities. And this project is a key component to Belize's natural energy policy, which is from 2023 to 2040, which seeks to ensure universal access to modern energy services while supporting Belize's transition to a more sustainable energy system. The second project is driving nationally determined contributions. A short term for it is NDCs, Progress Through Solar Energy and Wash Innovations, a $250,000 US project funded by the Joint SDG Fund to be implemented by UNDP and UNICEF. The project focuses on vulnerable rural communities in southern Belize and will integrate renewable energy with water, sanitation, and hygiene. Now, Wash Solutions, which will help boost the well-being of Belize's most at-risk populations.
I think it'll be really great to see how these projects will turn out, especially there when it comes to electrifying communities, because of how dependent we are as a society on electricity. Sometimes we need electricity to help pump water, and then now with all the online jobs and the digital transition, education is also heavily dependent on access to electricity. So it's going to be an interesting thing to find out how this project is going to go. When we look at a town or a city or a settlement, what is reflected in the infrastructure is the values and the priorities of that community or that society. And for example, I was learning a little bit about the Maya structure of Caracol, and I understand that they had over 1,600 water reservoirs. That's one reservoir for almost each plaza that was part of this great city. So we could tell for sure that access to water was severely important to this city. Not only that, they also had incredible value for education, because all of these small settlements, the small plazas, also included finger pots in their small temples or shrines for their ancestors. So we know that they valued access to resources for their citizens. They valued religious freedom, and they also valued education because it was evident in all of the small settlements that they had. So if we look at how our buildings are being built and how our towns are being built, are we reflecting the values and our priorities as we go along?
And I think all these things that you say are they make a lot of sense. And I think at the end of the day, I think we're never too, we think we're too modern to, learn from those from the past.
There's a lot of things that we can learn from older civilizations and their old structures because we can learn so much about their lifestyles and try to match them up with ours and see, do we still value the same things over time? Do we still care about the same things as we go along through time as human beings, in the society. So we'll go straight to a few simple everyday actions that are recommended by the UN, steps that we can take when it comes to water resources, since we were talking about the accessibility to water resources and the value of that. Some of the recommendations are to take shorter showers. Sometimes that's not negotiable, but sure. Avoiding overwatering gardens because then you're going to drown your plants and get root rot. Reduce food waste because since producing food also consumes massive amounts of water, if we waste food, we're also wasting water as a secondary effect.
And I think one more example to add is that one thing that a lot of parents usually tell us when we were younger was when we brush our teeth, we shouldn't let the sink keep running. I think these days they also try to explain to kids that in schools and stuff, which is great, right? Even now, we could also strive to all be if we're conscious of these things like water waste and all that stuff, I think we can learn and strive to be good examples to those that are younger. So although these are, individual measures that we can take ourselves, we can protect our water resources ourselves, but how can we ensure that this is done on a larger scale? When it comes to a national and regional level, right? So for example, on a national level, each country may be promoting and facilitating systems for rainwater collection and implementing water-wise infrastructure in home construction regulations, or educating and promoting of sustainable farming practices that minimize water pollution. Another one would be implementing regulations for sustainable farming to minimize watershed pollution and enforcing those practices. Educating locals on water pollution and the importance of watersheds. And watersheds also fall under the infrastructure part of it. And, in general, just education, I think, would allow us to know what we can invest on or invest in order to, be sustainable for a long time. And supporting community efforts for reforestation and watershed restoration. And I think, especially when we know the importance of it, I think it's easier to support it and easier to convince others as well to help us along with it,
Yeah, I think it's very important to educate people and help them be more aware about the effects of our actions. There's kind of this ripple effect that we have because of the watersheds that we're close to. If we're all sharing the same watershed, so whatever you do in the river, wherever you are, will affect other people further down the stream. So we have to really consider that and make sure that other people are aware that the river is not just there where you are, it continues and it flows into other areas and to other communities. So you can damage another community by simply having, bad habits or managing that watershed improperly. And together, our countries can establish a joint system to monitor water quality of our shared rivers in the Selva Maya, of course. We can also meet regularly to establish water management plans that benefit the communities of both nations, collaborate in the development of technology and research related to water resources.
Housing and water access must be planned together with the people who live there, because a growing town can still be a livable town if the growth is just sustainable and inclusive. And I think a big major point that we need to make here is that although we do one thing ourselves and we protect the water, I think at the end of the day, we don't make a change unless everyone kind of, starts doing it together. I think there is definitely a strength in numbers.
Yeah,
And-
it's like pouring potable water in the sea. It's gonna become salty. Like
Right.
if you pour fresh water in the sea, it's one drop of fresh water, it'll become salty. So if there's only one or a few people keeping the water clean,
Yeah.
and other people are keeping the water dirty, then it
won't,
disappears. The
yeah.
efforts will disappear unless we do it together collectively.
Definitely. So definitely try to bring, get your family included, and obviously your communities and friends at school. If you really value these things, and a long-lasting town and a great town would, have all those good qualities.
So far, we've looked at how planning shapes the growth of our towns, but what happens when that growth outpaces basic services like clean water, sanitation, and waste management.
In this segment, we'll be turning our attention to how urban growth is impacting public health, especially when it comes to the systems we rely on day to day to stay healthy. In your opinion, what do you think are some most common health concerns linked to poor sanitation in growing towns?
I think trash and waste management is one of the most common health concerns when it comes to poor sanitation, but also drainage systems
Right.
for sewage. That's a major issue, especially if you have those sewage drainage that is going into the river or into water sources to somehow wash away, but it's not washing away because we just mentioned in the previous segment that whatever we do in our section of the watershed will affect communities going further down the stream, right? But trash and waste management within the town is a major concern because of landfills and the designated areas for trash. The amount of plastic that we are using, that families and consumers are producing is just growing. So I think that's one of the most common health concerns in cities and towns. But have you seen any solutions to this problem, or any creative solution to improve sanitation services in that area?
I think, yeah, definitely. Oops, sorry. Wait. Yeah, I think once after you say that, we can cut to me. But then I wanted to add the fact that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, wait. Will you ask me the question again, or do we just cut to me? And just cut to me. Okay. Yeah. So. Wait. So she doesn't have to ask me a question again, right?
No.
Okay, I just start from the start. Okay. I think in our day-to-day lives, I think that food waste is also another big thing, right? I think all of us need to eat food at the end of the day. And I think the way that, companies package their food and stuff, right? For example, a lot of plastic bottles are seen around, right? A lot of us enjoy, our plastic soft drinks or canned, soft drinks and all that. And I think that when you talk about solutions. Okay, so I think that when we talk about the solutions and stuff like that, I think we kind of need to go to, we see the problems that, need solutions for. Oh, come on, thoughts. Okay, so when we talk about, the solutions to our problems, I think a big problem is food waste, right? All of us need to eat food. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of, companies or, restaurants and stuff that sell, drinks that are in plastic bottles. We see a lot of plastic bottles around, cans of, regardless if it's beer or soft drinks and all that. We have foam plates for our foods as well that really, they don't do the environment very well. So I think that some solutions could be places in which, a lot of people are at, specifically parks, even places where people play sports, like football fields or basketball courts. There should be more garbage bins around, right? And sometimes even prioritizing, maybe even recycling, right? Because maybe we can learn from other countries. And what if some countries, do really well when they recycle their stuff, right?
Right. The issue with the packaged food, I think in a lot of these areas, we're still trying to meet basic needs. And so when it comes to sanitation, it's almost put a little bit lower than the basic need of just getting up, getting some food in your body and going, right? And so that produces a lot of trash. But as we're growing in these communities, we have to begin to pay more attention to these environmental problems and the environmental problem of trash. And we can see that in most of the rural areas in Guatemala, they lack waste collection. And even here in Belize, we have rural areas that lack waste collection. They may not have a system in place for the collection of their trash. The city truck or the town truck may not go to the village.
Right.
And then even that, let alone a recycling system within the rural area, that's non-existent. As well, if it exists, it's probably very small, and it's a small project that is maybe done for a few months and then discontinued after the founders of the project leave, right? As a result, roadsides and even people's yards are filled with litter, the majority of which is plastic, which simply accumulates in the environment. And at worst, in order to get rid of that trash, people begin to burn the trash, producing carbon that goes up into the air. So still pollution. So they're turning trash into building material, could help reduce the amount of litter and create awareness about waste management. Remember, we were mentioning about using repurposed material for building houses. Well, that could be a potential solution for this trash issue. It could be considered one of the ways to reduce the amount of litter and create awareness around waste management. Just like it has been done in Comalapa, thanks to Long Way Home. It's a simple and safe way to reduce waste through construction.
Right, and definitely when you make the best out of the resources that you have, I think it's definitely a simple and safe way to reduce waste through construction. And this would be, to replace concrete blocks with sometimes trash-filled bottles known as eco-bricks. I think sometimes when we're on social media, sometimes we see other countries, diving into this initiative, right? And this could be done with the same kind of structural system as in the current concrete block buildings, right? And so that the earthquake safety doesn't suffer. And concrete blocks would no longer be needed, and the money saved could be spent on the community.
I think I've seen this initiative in Belize as well, carried out by this company named Oasis. They do like eco domes, and they make them out of like glass and plastic, and it's really interesting if you wanted to check it out online.
Right. We should also highlight how rising temperatures and poor drainage are also contributing to the urban heat island effect, which is linked to respiratory and heat-related illnesses, especially in underserved areas.
We've also seen some local governments partnering with youth groups to carry out community cleanups or awareness campaigns around water safety and recycling.
A good example comes from Melchor de Mencos, which, the local council installed eco-friendly hand-washing stations and compost toilets in informal neighborhoods. It's a simple but effective public health intervention. I think some other examples, like, when more hand-washing stations can also be seen implemented more in like local primary schools, for example, or even our high schools.
Yes, and when health workers work alongside urban planners and urban engineers, we get smarter, longer-lasting systems that anticipate, not just react to, our public health needs.
With the obvious fact that, towns are growing so rapidly, how can communities ensure transportation systems keep up with the demand while all, staying affordable, safe, and accessible for everyone?
Well, we have to consider the type of people that are living within these communities, right? Mm-hmm. They may be mostly farmers or low-income families that may not be able to afford a car to drive on the road. Mm-hmm. So they may often walk to work and school, catch a taxi or catch a bus. So public transportation really would play an effective role in ensuring that the demand for transportation stays affordable. Mm-hmm. So there's also more efforts underway to improve the road infrastructure, which can help people that have their cars to move around more freely, especially because within the adjacency zone, the towns and the communities here are considered more rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, there is the recent projects with the George Price Highway, where it's being reconstructed and paved out, and also they're adding new safety measures to the highway to ensure driver safety. In reference to Belize's project of improving the George Price Highway, on the other hand, the World Bank's Board of Executive Directors approved a new operation to improve infrastructure in Guatemalan highlands, the Verapazes and the Dry Corridor. The project includes the rehabilitation and upgrading of about 640 kilometers of roads, highways, and in rural areas, benefiting nearly 5.1 million people who live in these areas. The investments aim to improve access to markets, health and education services, and create greater productive and employment opportunities for communities characterized by high poverty levels.
Yeah, and improving road infrastructure is essential to drive Guatemala's economic development and strengthen its regional competitiveness. While the country has made progress in expanding its transport network, challenges always remain because only 40% of the roads are paved, which, it's still like majority isn't paved or aren't paved, limiting access to markets and services and hindering domestic and international trade growth. This project also includes the development of a long-term maintenance program to ensure the sustainability of rehabilitated and newly built roads. With a $400 million US investment, the Rural Infrastructure and Mobility for Well-Being program will prioritize the poorest rural populations, including women and persons with disabilities.
Breaking down the real challenges and possibilities when it comes to transportation in our own growing towns, it's clear that mobility isn't just about moving people, it's about connecting lives, services, and opportunities in smarter, more sustainable ways. And that wraps up our final segment for today.
Our last final note for the segment is that we should not forget how lack of transport options directly affects children's ability to also get an education, or how elders access healthcare when needed.
In fact, some community-based organizations have started mapping pedestrian hazards to advocate for safer routes, especially in school zones.
There's also rising interest in introducing bike sharing programs or walkable community zones to reduce emissions and make transport more inclusive.
And as we plan for future mobility, sustainability must remain central. Solar-powered bus stops or electric shuttle pilots could be low-cost, high-impact solutions if supported by municipal and international partners.
Yeah. Whether it's through partnerships, policy shifts, or grassroots innovation, there's momentum for creating truly people-centered transport systems in the adjacency zone.
So, if you're listening and wondering how to be part of the solution, here are a few recommendations. Advocate for safe routes to schools and clinics, especially in informal or underserved neighborhoods. Report hazards like missing signage, poor lighting, or traffic bottlenecks to your local council or village committee. Support sustainable transport ideas like shared bikes and electric ride services. Encourage partnerships between municipalities, NGOs, and authorities to improve bus routes and scheduling.
This brings us to an end of our podcast for today.
And to our listeners, we appreciate you for joining us. We hope today's episode gave you a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that come from growing towns, from housing and public services to mobility and planning. And to any guests who are interested in discussing this particular topic or any other topic, please let us know if you would like to be part of La Zona de Zone podcast. And see you next time, and thank you for listening again.